Good morning and welcome back to IGNO counseling session on MEG 4. Today we'll be discussing blocks 8 and 9. Hope you're ready with your counseling session. Hope you're ready with your study materials and your notebooks. Please do ask questions. I've been watching, quite a lot of you are watching this program, but then I don't see any question out there or any comments. The questions will help us understand what you have gathered from these counseling sessions. We'll be able to help you much better. So if you have any queries, even if you don't ask now, you can always ask later on. You can always ask, you can always post your comments in Facebook. And if you post your comments here, it will again appear on the StreamYard. So it will be easier for a lot of other people to know that you are attending this session and you are taking interest. So maybe your questions will be able to help others. So please do ask a lot of questions and please do go through the exercises, go through the self-check exercises. Please do a lot of practice. I have been telling this over and over again. Especially in blocks 3 and 3A, you need a lot of practice. Others you may be able to tackle. Again, in 9, you'll need a lot of practice. Others maybe you need a little less of practice. So we are about to start. We'll start exactly at 11 so that we don't waste any time of ours here. Hope you're there with us. It will be great to see you. Yes. Okay. Before I really go on to blocks 8 and 9, uh, I'll discuss a bit of sociolinguistics, which was, I thought, important to repeat. Let me. Yeah. It's time now, it's 11. So, as I said, we'll be discussing a bit of sociolinguistics. It will just take 2 to 3 minutes, maybe. In sociolinguistics, we have two elements called code switching and code mixing. Code switching and code mixing. If you can see this, I'm trying to bring it in front of you. Yes. I hope you're able to see it. Code switching and code mixing. Code, if we take it in a very from a layman's point of view, it's the language which we are using. So let's say when we are speaking English for some time, and then when we are amongst friends, we switch over to another code or another language. Maybe we start speaking in Hindi, or maybe we start speaking in our own mother tongue. So this is code switching. Now again, while we were speaking in our mother tongue, we use a lot of Hindi, or we use a lot of English uh, in that conversation. So that is known as code mixing. So code switching and code mixing. Again, like there are diglossic situations out here at times. Uh, for the higher middle class, it's normally the code that is used is English, and maybe the lower middle class or the lower classes, it's Hindi or the mother tongue. I've seen a wonderful example in the army. So if you're talking to an officer, you normally wish the officer in English, or he will that will the first language will be English normally. But if you are speaking to people of other ranks, you have to wish them in Hindi, or you know some other language. So if you were to wish an officer, you would wish him good morning, sir, or good morning, or a good evening, or good afternoon, whatever. Normally, you wouldn't say Sat Sri Akal, or you wouldn't say Ram Ram Sahab and whatever. But that is used for the other ranks. And in the other ranks, you normally wouldn't say good morning or good afternoon or whatever. You would normally say Sat Sri Akal or Ram Ram Sahab or whatever. So that is a diglossic situation. And a lot of if you say the ranks in the commissioned ranks, so these are all in English. Earlier we used to have a second lieutenant. Now we have got lieutenant, then the captain or the major, the lieutenant colonel, the brigadier, the major general, the lieutenant general, the field marshal. These are all in English. But in the other ranks, you see the Nayak, the Lance Nayak, the Havildar. But little higher up, Havildar Major, Quartermaster Havildar. These are cases of code mixing. At the lower ranks, it is the Hindi that is used, and slightly higher up in the other ranks, we have case of code mixing, Company Quartermaster Havildar. Then again, the JCOs, we've got the Subada, the Naib Subada, the Subada Major, code mixing. So we go higher up, we get cases of code mixing, and we use more and more of English. So there's a diglossic situation out there. Now, so that's all. That's all I have to say about code mixing and code switching. Now let's come to block 8. Block 8, we have got the variation and the varieties. Now let's look at Great Britain or the United Kingdom. Now, who were the people that lived there in the Paleolithic or the Neolithic ages? What were their languages? We are not too sure. Because not too much is written, not too much is recorded, so we really don't know. The first Indo-European language about which we have some information is the Celtic language. So the Celts, they were there. So in England we get the Celtic language. And Celtic also has two dialects, the Gaelic and the Brythonic. Now, we put some traces of Celtic even in modern English. If you look at these strong words, the strong words, which when we make past tense out of them, or when we make plurals out of them, we do not add s or es or d or ed. They've got their different words for their past and plurals. So those are the ones which have the Celtic origin. Now, England was attacked by some German tribes somewhere around 449, 450, around that time. Now, these tribes were Jutes, Saxons, and Angles. Now, the Celts who were conquered, they referred to their conquerors as Saxons. But the writers of these languages called their language as English. This word comes from the word Angles. As I said, there were three German tribes: Jutes, Saxons, and Angles. So the word English comes from Angles. Now we have the Old English period. The Old English period has a span of roughly 5 to 600 years. So 450 AD to 1100 AD, roughly that's the span. And we know of four dialects: the Northumbrian, the Mercian, the West Saxon, and the Kentish. Northumbrian and Mercian were spoken towards the north of England. We really don't know much about the Kentish dialect. But the most Old English literature is preserved in the West Saxon dialect. This dialect attained some standard, but this was cut short by the Norman conquest. The Norman conquest from Normandy, France. The king came and attacked England, and they took over. And we find, a lot of mixing, a lot of words came from French. Even later on, it kept on coming. In fact, England was attacked by much earlier by the Romans around 43 AD, during the time of Julius Caesar. There's a Norwegian, there was a Scandinavian influence. So a lot of these languages influenced English later on. Now, in the Middle English, we get a new dialect for the East Midland, which grew in importance, which is also the descendant of the Mercian dialect. Where was the Mercian dialect? Mercian dialect was spoken towards the north. Now this grew into prominence at this stage. Middle English period, we can roughly say the span from 1100 to 1500 AD, roughly another 400 years. A lot of variations can be seen in the spoken forms as well as the written literature. There are a lot of variations. A lot of loan words came, a lot of structures changed, a lot of things changed. English was pushed to the background, and French became, at one time, French became the language of the court, then Latin became the language of the court of the elite. Now, languages also differed from country to country. It was a huge problem. The main dialects of Middle English period are Northern, East Midland, West Midland, and Southern. The East Midland dialect became more of a standard, mainly because, in the first place, it occupied a middle position between the extreme north and the extreme south. Secondly, the universities of Oxford and Cambridge were situated in this region, so they had a lot of influence. A lot of the elite, the scholarly, came out from these universities. They controlled things later on. And in third place, London was situated in this region. So that was of tremendous importance. The power. People in power were in London. The higher middle class, the royal family, all the people in the court, people in the universities, people in the colleges, schools, they are they were in London. So they had a tremendous influence. Then we have the modern English period. Modern English, again, like we somehow divide it slightly. We've got the early modern English and the late modern English. Early modern English varies from 1500 AD to some roughly 1800 AD, and the late modern English from 1800 to the present. And there are a lot of changes still happening for different reasons. The survey of English language in the modern era gets complicated not only because of the addition of an international angle. There's an international angle to it now. It's not as pure or as simple as it used to be earlier. We've got the American English, we've got the Australian English, we've got the South African English, and the so-called Indian English. But also because of the radical changes in vocabulary, meaning, pronunciation, and grammar under pressure from different factors. Chief among them is a tremendous growth of science. We have seen the Industrial Revolution, we've seen the growth of science, and towards the end, from 20th century onwards, we have the tremendous developments in the field of computers and the internet. So we've got a varied range of words and structures. Things are changing. We've got a lot of new acronyms, new abbreviations. Then the influence of films, broadcasting, automobile industries, and then the influence of two world wars. The First World War, 1914 to 1918. Second World War, 1939 to 1945. They had tremendous influence. However, it's a widespread penetration of the language in various parts of the former British Empire. And the British had colonies all over. So wherever they went, they influenced the local languages, and they also borrowed a lot of things from these languages. And these days it is a language of communication. That is important. It's a language of communication. So you should be able to communicate to other people. So a lot of things have to change, are bound to change. Differences of culture, locale, and utility have produced different varieties of English in different parts of the world, which are distinct from the language of England. Now we have international varieties. North America, Australia, New Zealand, South Asia, Pakistan, uh, Bangladesh, India, Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia, then the Caribbeans, South Africa, the West and East Africa. Now, then there is one more very important thing. Now, Columbus discovered America. Of course, people in America are not too happy about the statement that he discovered. It was already there. So So people didn't know that it was there. So like they went. So when he reached America, or when Vasco da Gama reached India, so when a lot of Marco Polo he reached China, how did they communicate? Actually, they couldn't communicate in their mother tongue, which would not be understood here. And normally they wouldn't know the mother tongue or the language used in these parts. So there was a kind of, mixing of the two languages, simplification of these two languages, which are very important. It's kind of a broken language, you might say. It's kind of a reduction and simplification are the two processes used in such cases. Suppose you go to a place called Nagaland, where there are some around 20 recognized languages. Now these languages they don't understand each other. People of these speaking these languages they don't understand each other. So they use kind of a pidgin. They use a kind of a simplified language called Nagamese. Similar is the case with Arunachal. So they use a lingua franca. Now this is known as pidgin. It's somewhere in between these two languages. In Nagamese, it's a kind of a broken Assamese with a bit of Hindi and English and all that. So you get Nagamese. So here also, for the purpose of communication, and this is normally because of economic reasons that started in most places, because for the trade and commerce for business purposes. So this language which was used, a broken, it's very simple language. This is known as pidgin. 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 Now this pidgin preserves almost absolutely minimal grammatical structures needed for effective communication. Now, this pidgin, when it is spoken for over the years, and when the people settle down, and slowly it becomes the first language of some people. People use it as their mother tongue. This is known as Creole. 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 Creole is when it acquires a standard form. Is taught in educational institutions, is officially institutionalized, or it approaches the standard forms of an already existing standard language. This produces a very fluid linguistic scene in the country where speakers have varying degrees of proficiency in various languages. The languages at the top of the hierarchy, the standard forms are called acrolect, and those at the bottom are called bacillate, and those in between are called mesolate. Therefore, there is a huge usage of continuum in society. More and more people try to move socially upward from bacillate, they move on to mesolate and acrolect. Now we come to consolidation and standardization of English. Now here again, like you have to understand quite a few things. English started gaining importance all over Britain, and slowly the languages like Scottish or Irish, which come from Gaelic and of the Celts, slowly were reduced to level of unimportance. A lot of English Protestants developed in Ireland. The demographic structure started changing, and in the 19th century we see a potato famine. In potato famine, more than 1 million people died, and later on again people died because of malnutrition, other things. There was a disease in the potatoes, and potatoes was a staple food. Most people used to eat potatoes, and mainly the poor people, and they could not afford. And England was not willing to help. The King of England was not willing to help. They said like they will find out their own help. They're supposed to find out their own resources. Somehow, help came from America, help came from India, and a lot of other places. But still, some one-fourth of the population remained. Three-fourths died. And England started gaining more and more control on Ireland. Similarly in Scotland, the people who spoke the vernacular languages were looked down in society. Though there is a lot of literature in the Scottish dialect. In fact, they are not too happy to call this a dialect, as a language, but it has been reduced to the standard of a dialect, an almost non-entity. So unless people spoke English, they were just no one. So if you have to rise up, you have to speak English. The process of standardization. Now, East Midland dialect became the dominant variety. And this dominant variety was accepted as a standard. So once it is accepted as standard, when you write a lot of literature in it, when you use it for different different functions, then we need to elaborate the functions. So it became the language of court, it became the language of science, it became the language of literature, law. Just started developing. And then the question came of codification. Now, once it becomes standard dialect or a standard language, rules cannot be very different. There cannot be too many differences, too many variations. So then we find dictionaries coming up. Dr. Johnson's dictionary. We get meanings, we get words, we get spellings. They all have to be codified. Grammatical structures, rules, they have to be codified. So this is the process of standardization. We'll talk of selection, talk of acceptance, we talk of elaboration and codification. These four are interlinked stages. This in the stage of standardization. In case the selection, we can also say, apart from these regional socio-economic factors, is a political dimension to the question of selection of the standard variety. As has been seen in France and Spain, in England too, a standard emerged when ideas about nationhood and political autonomy gained currency. That is important. Nationhood, one nation, one language, that sort of thing, and political autonomy. Then we have the, as we've talked of grammar, the prescriptive grammar we're talking of. We're not accepting any changes at that moment. Pronunciation. When we come to Daniel Jones, he has a dictionary, Everyman's English Pronouncing Dictionary, even other pronouncing dictionaries were there earlier. So pronunciation is fixed. Now, then we can talk of the spread of English. We've already seen how English spread to Scotland, how English spread to Ireland, in other Celtic territories. Then we know people went from England to America. Of course, people from other countries also went to America from Europe, but English gained the prominence. So we've got the American English, the new standard. This became their first language. This became their lingua franca. They tried new standards. They tried to codify a lot of things. A lot of structures were different. Pronunciations were different. Spelling was different. And then the English made a lot of other parts their colonies. A lot of places in Africa, in Asia, Australia. They have their colonies. So language was slowly taking a different dimension. The local languages gained less importance. English gained more importance. And it became the language of the rulers, it became the language of the elite, it became the language of the schools and colleges, education system, the court. So people had to learn English. In India, by about the year 1600, English had established trading contacts with three continents: America, Africa, and Asia. The growth of English in South Asia, and especially in India, can be directly correlated with the growth of imperial rule in India. It is customary to trace the roots of English on the Indian subcontinent to 31st December 1600, when Queen Elizabeth I granted a charter to a few merchants of the city of London, giving them monopoly of trade with India and the East. So it's basically the East India Company, what we know about. And though the Portuguese were here, the French were here, Slowly they lost ground to English by a lot of coercion, a lot of politics. They ultimately took over the reins of most of the Indian states. They did a lot of war with the French and the Portuguese, so they became concentrated into on only on very small areas. In 1813, with the efforts of Charles Grant, William Wilberforce, and the Foreign Secretary Lord Castlereagh, the House of Commons in its 13th resolution, it resolved that it is the opinion of the committee that it is the duty of this country to promote the interests and happiness of native inhabitants of British dominions in India, and that measures ought to be introduced as may tend to the introduction among them of useful knowledge and of religious and moral improvement. So it was their duty, they resolved that it is a duty to promote interests and happiness of the native inhabitants of India, which was dominated by England. And measures ought to be introduced as may tend to the introduction of among them of the useful knowledge and of religious and moral improvement. This helped the missionary work in India and thus proselytizing the educational activities of the missionaries, which were very restricted and unplanned from 1600 to 1765, that were revitalized. In 1835, Lord Macaulay, in his famous minute, famous or infamous, whatever you might call it, said that they, the British, wanted to make a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern, a class of persons, Indians in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinion, in morals, and intellect. So they wanted to make a class of people, class of Indians who were given education through English, though they were Indians in blood and color, in taste, opinions, morals, and intellect, they would be like the English, and they would go back and teach their countrymen. Now, in 1854, Charles Wood said that he emphasized the use of vernaculars instead of Sanskrit and Arabic, and second, making English education optional, stating that the English language should be taught where there is a demand for it. Where Macaulay insisted on English, Charles Wood said English could be taught as a language where there was a demand. More important was the mother tongue instruction. On 9 July 1854, Charles Wood sent the Court of Directors the dispatch, which came next to Lord Dalhousie, the Governor General of India. It was due to this dispatch that in 1857, three universities were established in India at Bombay, presently Mumbai, Calcutta, presently Kolkata, and Madras, presently Chennai. By the end of the 19th century, the Punjab, Lahore, which is in Pakistan now, and Allahabad universities were established. Let me just check the Facebook in case there are some comments. Yeah. Waiting for some comments. No. Now, the Indian Education Commission in 1882 appointed to inquire into the dispatch of 1854 and to suggest methods for more completely carrying out the policy therein laid down, observed that there was no uniform pattern in respect to the medium language. They found that the mother tongue as a medium of instruction was neglected since a child studied the mother tongue for periods varying between 2 to 4 years, after which he read English, thus widening the gap between Anglo vernacular and vernacular schools. Secondly, English was studied as a subject for 2 to 3 years and then used as a medium, thereby leaving scope for improving the knowledge of English before its adoption as a medium. Third, at high school, English was invariably the medium of instruction. Fourth, the highest instruction in the vernacular was up to the middle stage, except in Punjab. And fifth, throughout the secondary course, English was employed as a medium of instruction. Then slowly, people started writing in English. More and more people started getting educated in English. And post-independence language policy, it is said, English having been made a medium of instruction in all the higher branches of learning, has created a permanent bar between the highly educated few and the uneducated many. It has prevented knowledge from percolating to the masses. The excessive importance given to English has cast upon the educated class a burden which has maimed them mentally for life and made them strangers in their own land. So then we find a lot of commissions which came in, and these commissions suggested the use of mother tongue at the lower levels and use of English as a library language. Basically, what's a library language? Library language is language which is used for reading and writing purposes. It is not important to speak them. The University Education Commission 1948 to 49, under the chairmanship of Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, argued for the replacement of English with an Indian language, but at the same time proposed the retention of English with a view to keeping ourselves in touch with the living stream of ever-growing knowledge. Then comes the question of bilingualism. Most Indians are bilinguals, if not multilinguals. Since the establishment and development of English in India, the language has always been a second language rather than the mother tongue. The English remained as a second language. It may be mentioned here that English in India functions in the following socio-linguistic setting. It is second language, is used as link language both intranationally and internationally, is used in Indian English writings, in fiction, newspapers. In fact, is burgeoned in its sphere, winning the international accolades. And English has gained a different dimension. Lot of words, lot of structures have been changed. Lot of things from lot of from Indian languages have been added to English by way of translation or by way of shift. So we safely call this, if you read if you read someone else's shame or any other writer, Mulkraj Anand or whatever, you get lot of words which are Indian basically and translated into English, and now they are used very, you know, naturally in Indian English. So we call this more of general Indian English these days. So we've got a lot of writers who have prominence who have come up. We have a lot of translations into English from Indian languages, Indian literature. So Indian English started gaining in importance. Now, we'll shift our focus a bit here. Yeah. One more thing I should have talked of this earlier, maybe. Now, the languages, there's a common element in some languages, we find. After studying this, when we go back, we see there's a root. One of these roots, or which we what we call the family, is the Indo-European language family. If you can see this, the Indo-European language family, on the eastern side we have got Sanskrit, and from Sanskrit we have got different languages of North India. Then we have the Armenian, then we have the Greek. From Greek we have got the classical Greek and we have the modern Greek. I'm just showing you the evolution of languages. We have the Albanian, the Italic. Italic we have got the French, the Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and the Romanian. We have got the Balto-Slavic. From Balto-Slavic, we have got Bulgarian, Serbian, Czech, Russian, and the Polish. Then we have got the Germanic. From Germanic, we have got the Gothic, the Scandinavian, and the West Germanic. From Scandinavian, we have got again the Swedish, with the Danish, the Norwegian, the Icelandic. From West Germany, we have got Old English, Old High German. From Old High German, we have got German. Old Low German, we have got Dutch. Then we've got the Anglo-Saxon, the Middle English, and the Modern English. See, we don't have the Old English out here. Then we've got this Celtic. From Celtic, we've got the Welsh, the Irish Gaelic, the Scots Gaelic, or the Gaelic, and the Manx. We've got the Trocharian and the Hittite. It's one of the many language families. In India, we have got quite a few other language families. We've got the Dravidian language family. We have got the Sino-Tibetan language family. Sino-Tibetan, from where we get languages from the northeast, Dravidian with the southern. So a lot of these uh, language families. Now, let's see one similarity. Old English father or father, Gothic father, Latin pater, Greek pater, Sanskrit pita. Uh, Old English iom or am, Gothic im, Latin sum, Greek eimi, Sanskrit osmi. So these similarities are there. Based on the similarities, we know that they belong to language family. We belong to the same language family. Then we have to understand what are dialects and what are languages. Dialects, there's a concept of mutual intelligibility. That dialects are mutually intelligible. But this is a partial answer. If two speakers of different dialects are mutually intelligible to each other in their day to day communication, then they are speaking the same language. That is how it is spelled. However, this is not a totally valid criteria. Two languages like Hindi and Punjabi may be so closely related that there is a bound to be some mutual intelligibility between speakers of two languages. On the other hand, the speakers of two dialects of the same language may not be mutually intelligible, as happens in the case of some varieties of Chinese, Pekingese, and Cantonese, as also Konkani and Marathi. A dialect is raised to the status of a language through non linguistic considerations. It gains separate status when it becomes politically and socially powerful. Then let's talk of accent. This refers to peculiarities of pronunciation used by the speaker or to phonological variations in dialect. Thus, English may be spoken by the British, American, or Bengali accent. The standard British accent is known as received pronunciation or RP. An Indian may speak English with a regional dialect, regional Indian accent, or use what has come to be codified as general Indian English. Dr. R.K. Bansal has used this term in his book in 1969. With pronunciation differences as shown here, the word gate, let's see, let me just try and show you this. Gate in RP is pronounced as gate. In general Indian English, it's pronounced as gate. Home, home in RP, home in general Indian English. Now, style. The dialectical variation, as we have seen, is governed by differences in social, class, and region. But linguistic variation can also rise because of the nature of the speech, context, or social situation. This type of variation is called style. The same individual has the ability to use different stylistic varieties of the language depending on his or her purpose or the situation in which it is to be used. An example, let's look at the frozen style. We've got different kinds of styles. Frozen. Visitors should use the two exits at the near rear on the way out. Formal. Visitors should leave the exits at the rear. Consultative. Would you mind leaving the exits at the rear? Casual. You could leave by the doors at the back. Intimate. Out you go by the back door. So these are different styles we're talking of. Then we have got something called register. Register refers to the linguistic variation determined by subject matter. Scientific writing is a register which is distinguished by the increased use of passive voice, formulae, technical terminology, etc. Let's come to monism, dualism, and pluralism. I was just checking who the people are there. Monism. Now we have come to block 9. We'll discuss a few things in block 9 which is very important, I feel. Monism, dualism, and pluralism. Monism, there's a feeling that style and content, there's no difference. Whatever we say have just one meaning. There cannot be any other meaning. But dualists, they feel no. A statement can have two meanings. Style as a dress of thought, where the thought or content remains the same, the words, phrases, language used to house the thought may change without making a difference to the substance or total meaning of the thought. And style is the manner of expression. This understanding of dualism can be contrasted with monism. This implies that every writer necessarily makes choice of expression, while the substance or content of the thought is the same. The manner of saying it, the words, phrases, language chosen to express it may slightly vary the total meaning. It is in these choices, in this way of putting things, that style resides. Pluralism. It talks of language in terms of different functions. We have the referential function, like the newspaper reports. We have the directive of the persuasive function, as for advertising. Emotive or social function, casual conversation. So it may have multiple implications. Uh, Literal versus figurative meaning. Here, I would like to request you to have a look at EG block 1. You'll get a lot of help from there. Figurative meaning sounds metaphor. Metaphor, suppose we say, The police combed the forest, but using the word comb, C-O-M-B, comb. So naturally, police didn't go with a comb and look for terrorists in the forest. As the comb goes through all the parts, all the hairs, so they searched very systematically, very thoroughly to find the terrorists. So there, the meaning of the word comb has changed. Comb was initially a noun, then we use it as a verb, and now the meaning has changed. So similarly, meanings keep on changing. Suppose we say someone he barked at me, but giving the quality of an animal to a human being, or he roared at us. A lion can roar, a tiger can roar. So that quality we are giving. So it is giving a extra dimension of meaning to the word. So the flag was wagging. So similarly, we can change meaning of inanimate object to animate objects, from animate objects to inanimate objects, and the meanings become more significant. We've got symbol, we've got irony, a lot of these things are there. We have alliterations, those help. One very important feature is foregrounding. Foregrounding. When you bring something to the fore, we give it a prominence, we give it an importance. So we call it foregrounding. This is a very important device in literature. And the rest is backgrounded, which is subordinated. They are backgrounded. The foregrounding, this word is extremely important in literature. Foregrounding. So giving prominence to something. Now, how do we foreground things? We foreground things through parallelism. Parallels, we see some parallels. The grammatical parallelism. A poor young man hesitated and procrastinated. See, hesitated and procrastinated. So there is a similarity in the structure. So we are foregrounding this. And as idle as a painted ship upon a painted ocean. Similarity of structure. Painted ocean. Ocean is not, you can paint an ocean. So we're talking about this color here. So painted ship and painted ocean. The fair breeze blew and the white foam flew. Blew and flew. The fair breeze blew and the white foam flew. Blew and flew. I kissed thee, I killed thee. Kissed and killed. This similarity. The same. Now, phonological parallelism. The fair breeze blew and the white foam flew. This alliteration, breeze flew, foam flew, f, blew, flew. This is phonological pluralism. And this is alliteration. B, b, f. This is alliteration. Then we've got foregrounding through deviant constructions. We were looking at foregrounding with the help of parallelism, a similar construction, grammatical or phonological construction. So you say the what of which of a wind, the what of a which of a wind. See all these W's coming together. What? A grief ago. So look at this. A brief time ago or a short time ago which was full of grief. A short while ago, a short time ago which was full of grief. So it's brief and grief. We're using it as one word here, grief. So a grief ago. We cannot have a grief ago, but look at the meaning now. The foregrounding, the grief, and the word brief. Now look at this, another poem. And I shall see some squeaking Cleopatra boy, my greatness in the posture of a boy. Cleopatra boy. What is this Cleopatra boy? What if we're talking of Cleopatra of Alexandria? Now, those days, the role of women used to be done by men because women were not allowed to act. Men used to act, the boys used to act. So a boy who is dressed up as Cleopatra is playing the role of Cleopatra here. Squeaking Cleopatra boy. Then we should look at, once again, to be very clear before really going into any exercise. We talked of language variation. One is the diachronic variation, the other is the synchronic variation. What did we see? Diachronic. Diachronic variation is change in time. We've got the language family, we've got the Indo-European family, and then from then we have seen different languages coming out. Similarly in English, we've got the Old English, somewhere between 449 to 450 to 1100. We've got the Middle English from 1100 to 1500. We've got the early modern English from 1500 to 1800. We've got the late modern English from 1800 onwards. This is the diachronic variation. It's temporal. This is the basis of time. Then we have the synchronic variation. At the same time, but at different places. We have the dialects in the first place. We've got different dialects in different languages. We talked of dialects as mutual intelligibility. But mainly it's because of political issues or economic issues or people who are in power, which is called a language and which is called a dialect. If people are not too powerful, politically or economically, what they speak is a dialect of some language. If they are strong, either it becomes a standard dialect or standard language, or it becomes a separate language altogether. Dialect again, we have got regional and the social class or caste. is a diagnostic situation. Higher classes speak kind of dialect, lower classes speak a different kind of a dialect. Different societies speak differently. Then we have the style, there's the formal style or the informal style, the frozen style or the consultative style or intimate style, which we have seen earlier. Then we have the register. Science has got its own register, medical register, register of law, register for literature. So, like in science, we may say kilometer per hour, but in literature, we will not use such a phrase. In legal register, you'll see provided that, and all such things. These normally we don't use in literature. So the people have different registers for different uses. Let us recollect what we have done in block 3 and 3a. Block 3 and 3a, we have seen the consonant sounds and the vowel sounds. Let me just go back once again before starting this part. What did we see in consonant sounds? We've seen different uh, we've got the manner of articulation, suppose. The manner of articulation, first we have the plosives. We had 6 plosives, pa, ba, ta, da, and ka, ga. Let me just see if I can bring it in front of you once. Let's see if I can just show you this. It'll be easier maybe for you. Yeah. If you remember this chart, see what have we said about the manners of articulation? First, we have the plosives. What happens in the case of plosives? The air is built up inside the mouth. There is a total oral and nasal close-up, and the air is released suddenly through the oral cavity. There's a kind of an explosion. So the word plosive. Let me repeat. The air is built up inside the mouth. There's a total oral nasal closure, and the air is released suddenly through the oral cavity. So we've got the plosives in RP, pa, pa, ta, da, ka, ga. Now, then we have the affricates. In case of affricates, there's also a total closure in the oral and the nasal cavity, but the release is not sudden. Release is slow, and there is some amount of friction. Now, in case of Fricatives, what was said was there's a stricture of close approximation. There's a stricture of close a stricture of close approximation in the oral cavity. The nasal cavity is closed, and the air is released with a lot of friction. So there is a narrowing in the oral cavity, and the air is released with a lot of friction. Pa, va, ta, da, sa, za, sha, ja, and ha. And there are 9 fricatives in RP. These are also continuants. See, if you say a fa, and if you continue va, tha, these will continue. These are continuants. Then we have the nasals, where the oral cavity is closed and the nasal cavity is open. And we have sounds like ma, na, and na. So we can. These are also consonants. Then we have the approximates ra, ya, and wa. Ra is an continuant. Lateral la is also a continuant. Lateral, the tongue is placed laterally, and the air passes from both the sides. Is lateral. Let's go back to stylistics now. Now let's look at this line. I am the heir of all ages. See, I have transcribed this. I've transcribed this. We have used symbols, which we learned earlier in block 3 and 3a. I am the heir of all ages. From Locksley Hall by Tennyson. Now look here. All the vowels and diphthongs are front vowels and front oriented diphthongs. Air, age, ages, ages. Here is not am, I am. See, I am the heir of all. This is only a back vowel, a rounded vowel. The ages. Just making it easier, these symbols would look different. I'm the heir. I'm the heir of only. This is the only back vowel. This is the front vowel, front diphthong, front vowel. So here the lips are spread and they are not rounded. Back vowels are all rounded. We have to describe these first. We have to transcribe it so that it becomes easier for us to describe later on. Now, it gives the impression of great length and the air of all ages. All ages. The ages seem like unbroken succession flowing down time. There are no consonants to stop the flow of the airstream, or no prose. You see, it's I'm the heir of all ages. This is a very soft thing here. It is mostly we don't even need this here. So mostly it is vowels only. There are no consonant, no plosives, basically, to stop the flow of airstream. And look at this. Fair is foul and foul is fair. Here, ra and la are continuants. And children often confuse them. Even Japanese, they confuse these, la and ra. There are two vowels, a or diphthongs, a and o. The first is a front vowel, produced with spread lips, and the other is a back vowel, produced with rounded lips. The familiarity with these two consonants is offset only by the difference in vowels. Air and owl. Fair, air, and owl, foul. Similarly, owl and air. That's the only difference. And la and ra are continuants and are confused, as said earlier. The play on identity and slight difference in sounds depicts very clearly how the two concepts fairness and foulness can be confused in Macbeth. Now let us look at one more poem. So all day long the noise of the battle rolled. So all day long the noise of the battle rolled. Let's transcribe this first and see. We've got la, da, ba, na, no, and ra. These are continuants. Da and ba are not, they're still continuants. Being continuants, the sounds add to the flow and length of the line. So it appears that the battle was long and continuous. Now the plosives ba and da. They interrupt the free flow of the sound by virtue of stopping the airstream and then releasing it with a kind of explosion. So there are a lot of explosions in a battle, in a war. This suggests a grim battle. Then there is a predominance of back-oriented diphthongs. Back-oriented diphthongs are vowels. They are articulated with rounded lips. This makes the action seem to be cyclical. It's continuing. Rounded lip. O, 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 I, no, O. This makes the action seem to be cyclical and same events occurring again and again. So, in addition to the battle being long and continuous, it is also cyclical. It stops and starts, and it's continuous. The roundness suggests the events are of momentous importance, extremely important events. It's a battle where deeds of personal heroism and glory are performed. It appears as if the battle itself is great and glorious. The rounded vowels are like drum beats, proclaiming to the world that this great event is taking place. So you can get so much, you can interpret things in such a different kinds of ways. Uh, just, I'll give some more places. Just show you a bit more. For prose, it will be easier for you because you have to analyze them grammatically. You have to see the finite and non-finite verbs. You have to see the main clause and subordinate clause and what kinds of different kinds of subordinate clauses are there, what kind of relative clauses are there. All these you have to talk of. We've got the subordinate clauses like the relative clause, we've got the noun clause, we've got the noun clause infinitival, we've got the adverbial clause, with the noun phrase indicated only when followed by a relative clause, the prepositional relative clause, with a comparative clause, with the causes, clause in parenthesis. Then we can talk of the phrases, the phrase structure of the passage. We can talk of the dynamic verbs and the static verbs. Uh, ah, I suppose this poem from by Pope, from the poem "The Rape of the Lock." Look at these lines. Files of pins extend their shining rows. Puffs, powders, patches, Bibles, and billet dough. Let me just show you here. Yes. See this? Here files of pins extend their shining rows, puffs, powders, patches, Bibles, billet dough. Now it's a lady who is sitting at a dressing table, and what you find in the dressing table? There are pins, files of pins, which is shining. There are puffs with powders, patches, Bibles, and billet dough. Billet dough is other love letters. Now, what an irony! See, Bibles and billet dough. Now, we are reminded of the Rosicrucian doctrine. Alexander Pope was a non-Christian, and he was trying to um, ridicule the so-called higher class women who were a lot of hypocrites. They would carry the Bible along with the love letters. So this is just a hypocritical situation that the she has to prove that she is a Christian. She is a very religious-minded person. So the Bible is there, and the paradox is the love letters by the side. So she has she has no she has no interest. She has got no faith actually. So there are a lot of things we can underline here. We can show here, and but then in the first place we have to be very sure of the transcriptions. Once you're able to transcribe, then it becomes easier. We'll be able to say which sound it is. We have to talk of the three-term labels, so it becomes easier. Then we should know the manner of articulation, and once we know the manner of articulation very clearly, it becomes easier for us to explain. Let me just go through this. The language of everyday use forms a background against which literature is produced. Other specific forms of language, like language of advertising, are related in some ways to literary language. Advertising, like literature, creates its own world in which its language makes sense. Literary language necessarily reflects the thematic content of the work because the style creates the world of the novel or the poem within which the action takes place. Thus, stylistically, yields essential knowledge about the literary text. The language of literature can never be taken as literary, as ordinary language can be seen, as be taken, because it has meaning not of itself alone, but of the context which it has been selected to reflect. Within a literary text, however, we can distinguish between literal and figurative uses of language. The world of literary work is complete in a sense that it is an organic whole. Naturally, of course, it is to reflect reality if it has to have any significance at all. The reader is not a part of the dimension of the work. He or she stands outside. The literary work is foregrounded against ordinary language, that is, it stands out as a spatial use of language for specific purpose. Within the literary work itself, some part of the language used is foregrounded and the rest forms the background. Foregrounding takes place in two ways: through the creation of rhythmic patterns of parallelism, deviation from the accepted conventions of grammar, lexis, phonology, and discourse patterns. I think that's all from my side. We have covered most of it. Uh, there are maybe a few small things here and there. Maybe if you ask questions, it will be easier for me to answer later on. I don't see any questions here really. Um, yeah, there are no questions here. I'll see that. I should be happy if you keep on looking at these videos and uh, no, not no questions at mind. Please ask questions later on so that we will be able to answer that. And look at the reference books that's given. Don't only read the blocks. If you want to score better, if you want to learn better, you need the reference books also. And you'll get my contact number with the coordinator. You can talk to me directly, or you can get my email ID there. So it will be easier for us to communicate. So in case of any help, please let me know. So thank you for now, and let's say bye bye. Just for now, in fact. So we'll catch up later on in case it's required. And thank you once again for those of you who are watching. Thank you.